the dialogue. But again, this session is meant for attendees to ask any questions that you might have. You can use the chat here, or even better, feel free to let us know in the chat that you want to speak, and we will enable your microphone so you can ask questions directly. You can, of course, also raise questions to through Slack, and we will read them here. But in any case, the main drivers for this session are anyone attending who has questions that we can answer. But while we wait for those questions to come in, I'll actually hand it over to Petr, Adam, and David. And actually, I would ask, let's say the first question is for each of you if you can give us a quick summary of your area, your specific area, and maybe a highlight of the recent, let's say, I would say 1 year to put a framework or something, but recent highlights of what's new in your respective areas that you would like to highlight. And I'll save my other question for after this one, just a recap of the highlight of the recent KubeVirt improvements in your areas.
Sure, I can go. So I've been talking a lot. I've already introduced myself previous presentations. I'm David Vossel. I'm one of the core contributors to the KubeVirt repo. So I primarily focus on the virtualization side. One of the kind of things that are floating around in my mind right now, again, a lot of it has to do with kind of moving towards what we need for KubeVirt version 1. And one of the big topics there is I want to figure out ways to reduce the complexity of our virtual machine API. So I've been kind of pondering that problem for the past few weeks, and I've come up with a flavor proposal that maybe helps shape that a little bit. And that's kind of my area of focus, I would say, in the past few months, really. But yeah, that's me.
Yeah, sure, I can go ahead. So I'm Adam Litke, and I'm focused mostly on the KubeVirt storage area. Really a lot of attention on CDI and how it interfaces with KubeVirt. Some of the big things that we've worked on, which we've seen some presentations during the summit, but about hot plug, also about VM snapshots, kind of trying to think about moving beyond the moment when you first create a virtual machine and import the data, and looking to how storage comes into play with managing it going forward. Some other things we're looking at in terms of, like, one of the biggest things that we get is this complexity or a bit of friction with trying to work really well on all kinds of storage, but users not being able to, running into problems where their VMs don't import properly because they're not exactly sure which PVC parameters to create for their VM and things like that. So kind of just working on making all of that work a little bit more seamless and automatic. And the previous presentation was really interesting to us, is because we're looking to make the cross namespace cloning with CSI work really well. So we're excited to work with the community to get that delivered.
I'm here to represent the network side of things. My name is Petra, and for the last year, you got me kind of unprepared here, but I'll try to figure out something. For KubeVirt/KubeVirt, our main focus was on IPv6/dual stack support, which is currently being implemented and stabilized in Kubernetes, and we wanted to follow that and extend this to users of our VMs as well. And then another huge effort that we invested in was support for SROV, which was, we were working on this for quite some time, but we finally made it stable, useful, and covered by CI this year. So I encourage you all to try it out and use our SROV. I also work on other components that are kind of around KubeVirt, and it are bringing advanced networking features to Kubernetes and to KubeVirt. It spawns all the way from the host network configuration using Kubernetes NM state that you might have heard of, through deployment of Multos, CNI plugins, management of MAC addresses, and all this stuff. So yeah, that should cover it.
Thanks, and sorry to put you on the spot. I'm prepared, Peter.
No
But
worries.
actually, David, following up on what you mentioned about the previous session, I see in Slack that Alan, who is also here as an attendee, asked it in Slack. It's kind of a follow-up of the V1 session, but I think it's relevant to this one. His question on Slack was, when do we expect V1 to be released, or if there is any timeline? Maybe this was not clear, so I think it's worth clarifying this.
So I had a personal goal of getting version 1 out by the end of 2020. I don't think we hit it. Nope, did not hit that one. So when it's done is the best answer. I think that we are certainly making progress quickly, as I outlined in the presentation, just showing how much we've gotten done of that list that we've defined. And really the last big items here are, the one that I'm most intimidated by, I will say, is removing root from our VMI pod. And if we consider that, we continue to consider that an item that has to be in our version 1 offering, I think it's going to be certainly months away, not weeks. I again hope this year seems definitely more achievable than last, but that's the big blocker in my opinion.
Okay, well,
I want to follow up one thing with that real quick.
Please.
Version 1 isn't magical, exactly. So, we just saw in our previous presentation that people are using KubeVirt in production today. And that's not the only person using it in production. We see this, we've seen other presentations today and yesterday. There's not a reason to necessarily have to wait on KubeVirt reaching version 1. Before adopting it. I want to make sure that's clear. And there's a commitment to our APIs already. So if you looked at that list that I had, one of the things on that list was GAing, or making our API generally available for our core set of APIs. So that's virtual machines and virtual machine instances, and just the primitives that you would use for KubeVirt. Those are going to remain compatible. Those things are pretty solid as they are now, and we don't anticipate changes there. So building on the foundation that we have now is safe with our API. I wouldn't be hesitant on doing that.
Okay, and that's actually I believe that partially explains a question that Josh was raising, but maybe to emphasize, so Josh in the chat was asking, are we waiting for 1.0 before looking at moving to the CNCF incubating stage? So right now, KubeVirt is a CNCF sandbox project, and the next step would be incubating. So is version 1.0 anything related to that milestone or not? I guess you partially answered, but just to.
I don't think that is being tracked as part. I think these are independent things. I have not been a part of the discussion on transitioning to the incubation milestone. So I'm not, I don't think I'm going to be able to accurately answer. Yeah.
Okay, maybe I can add something here because I have been part of some of those talks, but I guess one of the main, let's say the main focus for the project, I think, on that area is not as much on version 1.0 as a name or a label, because as you mentioned, the API is stable, etc. I think the major focus of the project towards the next stage is adoption and making. I mean, there is adoption, as we have seen in several of the sessions during that summit, but it's like documenting all this. I mean, some of the milestones towards V1 are actually related to this, let's say, next step in the CNCF ladder, if you want, but not necessarily related to code itself or document itself, but just well, clarifying a few things and increasing, making more clear where we are, where do we want to be, and how is the usage. Show more of this adoption and use cases, and make it clear and how KubeVirt is being adopted and used. Let's say that would be my take. I see some entries in the chat. And actually, I would encourage people, I don't know if you want to, Josh, you were having entries, and Alan is also, CNCF website has KubeVirt as incubating, does it?
The first stage that we applied for a while back, and I just clarified himself, saying that he meant graduated. That's it.
Okay, well, while we clarify this, I don't think so. Yeah, I'm checking if there are any additional questions, because I see some activities in different places. Yeah, Marcus is saying, sorry, because I'm checking. Okay, let's enable. So Marcus, you should be able to share, to enable your microphone now.
Hello?
Thank you.
Can you hear me? Yeah, this is Marcus. I just had something I wanted to mention. I ran into something relatively recently that I just thought would be good to share. And honestly, it dovetails. I did a presentation like 6 months ago at KubeCon about scaling, and this would have been great content for that. Unfortunately, it kind of happened out of order. But we found, and this may be documented somewhere, I just missed it or whatever, but we found that when you start talking about thousands of Kubernetes nodes, the Vert Handler daemon set needs some special handling. I think by default, it syncs, like every Vert Handler will sync on like a 5-minute interval, which means that it basically fetches the whole state of everything it's subscribed to every 5 minutes. So if you think about 300 seconds and thousands of nodes, at any given moment, you could have 10 or 20 Vert handlers pulling down, giant, state of the system syncing up the controllers. And so and fortunately, the Vert handler actually has configurations built into it where you can increase the sync interval. And so you may want to tweak that sync interval so that they're not checking in and syncing up as often if you have a large number of systems. There was also, so the other thing is that sync can take some time. It can take 30 seconds if you have, if your environment is really large or is busy or whatever. And what we found was that these Vert handlers were coming up, and they were syncing, and they might take 30 seconds to sync, and like I think the liveness probe was failing, and so it would restart the Vert Handler, and it would become this storm of restarting Vert Handlers. And I think it was triggered because we were trying to roll out the Vert Handlers faster, and we changed the rolling strategy to allow multiples of Vert Handlers to be down at the same time. But yeah, there are a couple things there where you may want to extend both the liveness probe so that the Vert Handler has time to initially sync and come up to speed, and then also maybe spread out those sync intervals. And there may be other things we can do in the code to kind of improve that, or maybe minimize the amount of information that's synced. But yeah, I just thought that would be useful as people scale their systems.
That's surprising to me. So one of the things we mute for a second.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, thanks. One of the things we tried to do in Vert Handler was ensure that we only pulled down the state necessary to process what's running on that node. So the number of objects that it should be pulling and syncing from the API server should only pertain to that specific node, which should be a limited subset. So if you're running 1,000 nodes, we're still hopefully only pulling what's necessary for that node. I'm curious if we have done something wrong, if you're encountering this. That's my first inclination, that maybe we've messed something up if you're having this problem, because certainly that was the thing we designed to avoid, I guess is the best way to describe it.
And it could be that there's a bug, or maybe it's something in our environment, but we did find that the Vert Handlers in the smaller environments we were testing in, they were fine. And so we did our qualifications and everything through several different clusters that were maybe 100 nodes or whatever, just for testing. And then when we went out to larger systems, suddenly we started seeing this, and it could be something environmental, something not necessarily related to the nodes or to the node counts themselves, or the Vert Handler pulling down. Whatever it was slower than usual. And so the Vert Handler was taking too long to come up, and things of that nature. So just something to be aware of, and definitely we can dig into it. We weren't in the position to like roll a patch fix immediately, so we were trying to find a solution to it. And so we found that tweaking those values helped a lot.
I'd like to track this. Would you mind creating a bug report on GitHub for us? And what I want to investigate, go ahead and attach me to the issue. I want to investigate what informers we are using in Vert Handler and see if we accidentally leaked a globally scoped informer rather than one that's narrowly scoped just to the objects that are supposed to be running on that node. We might have had a regression here. So we need to give this a little bit of attention. That's some great feedback. I suspect that you're one of the few people running like over 100 nodes with KubeVirt right now. So yeah, you're gonna see some things that maybe we don't.
And unfortunately, we don't have giant development environments or giant throwaway environments, which might be useful to kind of virtualize or create some sort of synthetic large environments for this kind of testing. But yeah, I'll create an issue for that.
Yeah, Marcus, I'd definitely be interested in it too. I know, like from our end at NVIDIA, we've been looking at similar things. We've been looking at, just from our testing, we can look at 500 nodes for a scale, just from some immediate work. We've seen some similar things as well. Yeah, would definitely want to participate in the discussion there.
In the previous presentation, I was actually trying to, that's kind of information I was trying to pull out of if they encountered anything like that. So it's great feedback that you all have, and I think that's the first step for us to improving the situation is to understand it. So yeah, let's definitely follow up.
Okay. So Soumya wants to speak, so let's turn Soumya as well in. Meanwhile, just a clarification that about the topic about incubation. So there was apparently some mistake, just to confirm. KubeVirt is still a sandbox project. We will think about incubation as the next step. So Soumya, welcome. You wanted to bring some topic.
Yeah, so on the topic that Marcus and Brian were discussing, so I had a issue where I didn't throttle my API requests, and suddenly like there were thousands of pending VMs in my cluster, and what that actually caused Vert Handler was sending list and watch calls to my API server, and it really started to overwhelm my API server, and the API server was not able to pull in data from etcd within the default timeout, and it just sort of brought down my whole cluster. I mean, API throttling is one aspect of it, but I think Vert Handler, I mean, there could be improvements made in the frequency of list and watch calls that the Vert Handler sends, because we were just running some edge case experiments, and this totally brought down the cluster, and it was painful to have to revive the API servers after this.
So you said that API limits or throttling was disabled. Was that a solution for you to help avoid this?
Yeah, so I believe in Kubernetes 1.20, there is API fairness introduced, so that could really help. But even otherwise, let's say I have a really big cluster, like say 1,000 node cluster, right? The Vert Handler on every node is going to issue a request to the API server, and that could potentially really overwhelm the API server. Just because of the frequency of the calls and the number of objects it's having to retrieve from the data store, right? So I think, I mean, I haven't looked at it deeply, but I definitely feel like there could be some optimizations around this in the Vert Handler.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's consistent with what Marcus was saying as well. And just poking around at the code a little bit, I have found a few instances where we're making API calls that perhaps we can avoid as well. And the frequency of that's unclear to me, depending on how often, for example, a virtual machine loop gets triggered. It's unclear if we are making multiple calls that should only happen once. Things like that, we need to give more attention to that. This is good feedback.
Great. So there is a comment here about from Kevin in the chat, suggesting to, back to the topic of scaling, maybe worth creating a mailing list or special SIG or working group about scaling. Well, we can, I don't know, David, thoughts? I think, well, there is, just a reminder, there is a KubeVirt dev mailing list. That could be a starting point, I guess, but I don't know if do you guys think if there's enough volume to create a specific topic for that? I think let's bring it to the discussion.
Adam, you're unmuted. Did you have thoughts on this? I can start talking, but I feel like I've been dominating the conversation too much.
No, I was actually preparing to discuss Alan's question, but my thoughts about Kevin's suggestion would be that I would suggest just taking up the conversation on the KubeVirt dev mailing list, and if the volume of the topic becomes such that it makes sense to break that off into a different forum, then it would be pretty easy to do that.
Yeah, I would agree. There's a scaling point where we tip over to the noise ratio just gets too high for one mailing list, signal to noise ratio. So let's see when we get there. I'm not sure if we're there yet. but certainly it makes sense in the future, especially with the growth that we've seen recently in the project.
Thanks. And Alan, if you wanted to follow up, there is a question from Alan, if you can read it. And
Yeah, so I could read the question out if that's helpful. So it says, I have a large-scale shared everything relational database that requires the storage for the database to be shared to multiple VMs, one for each multiplex node. Since I can't use PVC as worker node, I'm trying to understand here, will not have local storage to support the disk.img file. How should I share read-write storage to the virtual machine? So I guess the follow-up question I would have there is, I assume that the fundamental storage that we have available in the system is locally attached to the individual Kubernetes nodes, which would have that limitation of not being read-write many shareable, obviously, or only locally accessible. I mean, if that's the case, I think you can't get away with trying to find a way to share the storage, for example, like using something that's going to consume the local storage and present it in as shared storage, something like Ceph or something. I mean, that may not be what you're looking for. Maybe it could be accomplished with NFS or something. Otherwise I wouldn't see how you could actually share that storage to other nodes. Maybe you could also have an external, external storage server somehow exposing storage that all the VMs would be able to access. So yeah, I guess not NFS, but yeah, I guess, I don't know. I wonder what others would think about that. But I mean, I just don't, other than trying to take that local storage and finding a way to share it across the nodes, that's pretty much what you'll have to do.
What would we do with a pod? I guess if we wanted to share storage between two pods that's locally, the only option I can come up with in my mind is a host path on the node of some sort. I don't know any other way of doing that in a read-write mini fashion for what's equivalent of local storage. I could be wrong.
I mean, if you're okay having the multiple VMs that are accessing the storage running on the same cluster node, then that seems to defeat the purpose, though. I'm assuming they want it to be able to spread throughout the cluster. So, okay, so you have a storage provider.
Oh, well, okay. So it supports read-write mini.
Let's bring Alan to the discussion, please. 1 second. So that will be much faster because we're already over time, but that sounds like a very interesting topic and we will try to address it quickly. So Alan, you should be able to enable your microphone now. So
I may have misunderstood the question. Sorry, Alan, if I got us on a tangent there.
Okay. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
So yeah, we've SAPIQ. It's a shared everything database. So it uses basically the main storage and the system storage is shared to each multiplex node. So each node is a separate VM in this world. So in our physical servers or on VMs, we would just use a SAN or something to share that up in either raw block or raw device or as a file system that the DB files can be written down to, and then each multiplex node sees the same copy of that file. IQ handles the actual writing down into the individual blocks in the DB files, so it handles the communication. So when I tried to do this with KubeVirt, I originally used PVC, not realizing that the disk image had to, when it brings it up in the pod itself, has to be 90% of the total storage you needed. So therefore I ended up in a situation of I can't use a PVC to do that. So what is my way of using, providing the storage up to the VM so I can share it across? I have looked at using an NFS server, but a lot of our clients, we're a PM analytics tool for telecoms. They want rid of NFS. They don't want to see NFS. They don't want to hear it. So I originally had thought of using an NFS server, putting it in place, and then sharing that to each VM, and that becomes, you mount it in after the VM comes up. It's not ideal. It's not as performant as I'd like, and ideally, I'd like to keep it because we would have multiple customers. At the moment, we're talking about 1,000 deployments of our product across 300 customers. We are going to have multiple deployments scaling from anywhere from 2 terabytes to 60 terabytes in the moment, probably 100 terabytes database size. So we would like to keep it as close to the Kubernetes and keep it as close to a generic storage provider as we can. We just expect a storage provider to come in across our customers, give us storage which has read-write many access, and then we share them up into the VM for usage. And we will create the DB file then on top of that. That's my problem statement at the moment. I'm trying to figure out how I can get around it. Yeah, Vert OFS actually has piqued my interest today, and I must do some reading on it. So I was just wondering, has anyone hit this or have solutions? That's where I've come today to look at.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think it just seems to me, we can't really get around the general statement that you do need to have that shared storage in the environment. So whatever that ends up being, and it looks like we've got a suggestion for CephFS, and also I'm not really sure how VirtIOFS necessarily plays into it. That's to me just more about how you expose the storage into the VM. I mean, that's how it appears in the VM, but in terms of something high performance, you just really need that shared storage first, and then whether you attach it as a VM disk or you attach it as VirtIOFS, I don't know if that would matter.
Okay. Yeah, that's my problem. It is the solution that I need to come up with, as would say, something to allow me to do it. And realistically, we have, I could look at providing something through the actual, what's providing the storage provider will have exposure to, I can mount in separately to the VM, but I'd like to tie it to the Kubernetes if I could. So it simplifies the solution down there. It's not a manual step after once the VM is up to mount it up. It all becomes part of the one flow. But yeah, no, I'll take some of the things here and go back with it.
Yeah, I would definitely be interested in following up with you in more detail. Just to understand like the details of the storage provider and other things like that. In a forum where we have more time to look at specifics.
Okay, yeah, I can definitely, I'll be around.
Yeah, there is already a question on this on Slack, so I encourage you to follow up there and take it from there, because we are already again a bit over time, but we have more questions. If you don't mind, if you have a few more minutes, Peter, David, Adam. So Fan joined here and asked, sorry, where was the question? So I wanted to see if someone has seen an OOM happen on the Kubernetes API server when timeout or panic of list watch requests coming from Vert Handler and Vert controller for thousands of BMI creation solution requests. So has anyone seen something like that? Does that sound familiar? Maybe.
No, I haven't seen that. I've seen that occur. I've definitely seen a OOM occur on API server, pretty much every component at some point. Increasing the memory request limits should help. If it doesn't, then there's potentially a leak in that component that would need to be figured out. The other thing you could do if you really need to throttle Vert Handler is to rate limit Vert Handler's ability to talk to API server. I really think rate limiting is something that we should all be doing in our clusters to protect our components from each other. So bad actors making too many requests, taking things down, things like that. We have to be defensive. So I would be defensive in what you allow Vert Handler to do with your API server.
Okay, and I see more questions coming, and actually as well in Slack, but I'm kind of worried about the time. So you guys tell me when, if you have to, oh, don't be shy. Meanwhile, we'll keep reading. There is one here from Sheng. Do we have a plan to introduce some kind of metrics for life cycles in VM creation? For example, time it takes waiting for a domain UID or time it takes to create a connection. I'm not sure if those metrics already exist or if we have any plan to add them.
I'm not sure. We certainly have metrics. So today we expose our metrics through a Prometheus endpoint in all of our components. That specific metric that we're talking about, so this time between, I guess, when a virtual machine pod starts going from then to the domain getting created within that pod in libvirt. I don't know if we track that or not. I mean, I think that we'd be interested in exposing anything that the community found useful there. So metrics come in all shapes and sizes, and people are interested in different aspects of that for whatever shapes their use case. So certainly talk to us about that.
Cool. One final question before we close that came from Slack. Karim was asking is it mandatory to set a boot order to boot from ISO, or can I expect the VM will boot from ISO where disks are empty?
Right. So this would be basically just the standard libvirt behavior, which is when you have multiple disks, you need to specify the boot order if you want to select one of those in particular. There's no special logic about what's installed there. Now I know with like Vert install and Vert manager, they do some stuff underneath the covers for that to make it nice for you. But for right now, we don't have any kind of that extra logic built on top that I'm aware of.